In one of the last readings, I was smiling to myself, looking at a couple of injuries that I have on my hands. Because yesterday, or a couple days ago, I decided I'd take my wife's African gray parrot to the shop to have his very sharp claws and beak trimmed. And I took him in, and I said to the man, I don't get to hold him anymore because he used to always bite me. I haven't held him in about 3 years. And the shop owner, this wonderful man, said to me, don't be afraid. You've got to trust that they can change, just like you. Can't you change? And I introduced myself as a plumber. He said, literally, he said, they change. He said, give him another chance. I said, but it hurts. He says, I know, but give him another chance. He said, you've got to know that he doesn't mean the injuries. He doesn't mean to harm you. He's afraid. So I said, well, let's try it while we're together, as if somehow that would help me. So I did, and I held him, Marcella, I'm holding him on my hand, and I'm looking away because the woman next to me says to me, like they say with all dangerous animals, he'll know if you're afraid. So I thought, if I don't look at him, probably I'll be less afraid. So I'll look at the person here, and I made it through the whole thing. And I went home last night feeling wonderful. The parrot I took out of the cage, and I put him on the little perch in the kitchen. And then after dinner, there's one point when I thought, I've got to trust that he could change. I went up, he immediately bit me. And then after dinner, again, a second time, I thought, well, I'm not going to give up on him because this shopkeeper, said people can change. You've got to give him time. Just approach him slowly. I approached him slowly with the other hand. He bit the other hand. It's not actually my sermon. I want to tell you about a radio interview that I heard, a curious one. It was of the curator for what was then a new museum or library museum in Scotland. And it's called the Library of Mistakes. From the library's website, so you can imagine, I heard that interview, thought I have to go and look at that website. It reads, mistakes can sometimes be serendipitous, but even when they're not, their study still has value, as human progress is based upon learning from mistakes. The more we know about why smart people do stupid things, the fewer stupid things we might do. The Library of Mistakes provides a resource for the study of such mistakes as we fulfill our motto, and I'm sure you'll all be able to repeat it in 2 languages, Mundum mutatu errore singulatum, which we Jews know means changing the world one mistake at a time. And I listened to this interview and I thought to myself, we enter into the Museum of Mistakes at least once a year. It's called Rosh Hashanah. And then we go for another visit because we have a season pass, it seems. We go for Yom Kippur. But if we're truly religious, we do it every day. We have a vidui, we have a reflection. Every day we have a prayer book that opens up with another mirror because we have changed in that day. Every day we look at that mirror and we say, for the sins that I have done, let me realize them, so that the next ones will be different, so that my imperfections will help me to grow as a human being in relation to you, whatever I understand you, God, to be. What was interesting to me in the wording, and you may have caught it because I stressed it, the Scottish Museum said, see what comes after errors. Errors aren't mistakes, or aren't interesting, I should say. What's interesting, what's fascinating, is what comes right after mistakes. Isn't that wonderful when you read a biography? Not to read of their great successes, but to read about the moments when they fell, when they dropped, when they made great errors. But then the moment afterwards is when we realize heroism, when we see them climbing up again, to be worthy of that book, to be worthy of a memoir. I think about a conversation that we had when my kids must have been maybe 10 and 12 or 8 and 10. We were hosted to a great dinner in the beautiful gardens of a wildly successful fashion designer. And my son, who was building and making and inventing a lot of things then, as he still does, said to the couple, he said to the woman, he said, but I get so frustrated and I hate frustration. And she said to him, oh, what happens right after frustration is the best moment. That's when great things are developed and invented. Think about that. What happens after frustration? Recently, I took up sculpting, a nighttime pastime, a nighttime relaxation and therapy, sculpting busts, heads. And there was one point in the first one or the second one, and I sent a note. I was sending a text to an artist friend of mine saying, I'm frustrated. I think I'm going to mash it up and throw it away. And she sent me a text that says, give it another 5 minutes. She says, just give it another 5 minutes. Remember, clay can always be reshaped. Clay can always be reshaped. What do we say in the book of Isaiah? God is the potter, we are the clay. What are we believing about our tradition? What do we understand God to believe about us and our potential? That never can we not be reshaped, that we're always malleable, that our loved ones are always malleable, that every human being has that gift and that potential of always having the capacity for reshaping, never to be thrown or discarded as garbage, not as art. Look at all the greatness that's come after errors in science, in laboratories where they intended to find X but found Y. Look at the great paintings in the world and see all the beautiful mistakes hidden one layer below the masterpiece. Realize in those mirrors to our lives, mirrors to our stories. I think about a moment in my life when I stood at a certain bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah some years ago, and I realized there's a pattern in Jewish parenting in these moments. That the imperative for some parents is, and for some families, to display what human perfection looks like at age 13. That boychik, the little boy or the little girl, all we're hearing about is their great achievements by age 13. And I wonder what it feels like to be that boy or to be that girl. And God knows I love my kids, take unquenchable pride in who they are, their character, and their achievements. But I also wonder, at what cost to the kids? At what point will that play out in their lives? And at what cost to all the 50 kids in that sanctuary who are hearing about their friend who apparently is perfect? What must it be like, whether they internalize it, think about it consciously or not, to realize as they sit there, I don't know that I measure up to him even though he's 4 feet tall. I don't know that my grades or my scores or my pirouettes are as great as hers. What messages are we giving? Are we giving the impression that Jewish parents only value perfection? Are we giving the impression that our society, as it does, only values achievement and success and undervalues something that in this sanctuary we know has great value, which is failures, which is errors, which is realizing that if we turn to the person next to us over this holiday and say something like, tell me about the greatest challenges in your life, we'll come to admire them more than if we ask them, tell me about your greatest successes. That if you turn to her, you turn to him, or you turn around on the way out and say, tell me about a moment when you failed and then grew to success afterwards, you'll come to realize the heroism that exists in simple people, all of us. That the wealthy and the great, the mighty, those who are on the covers of magazines and on our televisions are human beings through and through. That perfection is something we need to discard as individuals and as a society, because ultimately what perfection does is it's married to something called stigma. And that stigma isn't just a word, it's dangerous. Stigma distances people from one another. And all we want as human beings is closeness with one another. I remember from my work in healthcare in Africa, realizing that the word stigma had real value. Real meaning, I should say. I remember working in East Africa year after year and seeing that people who suffered from stigma because of the choices or conditions of their lives were people who would not seek health care because they were afraid to be seen going to a clinic. There would be backdoor entrances at HIV clinics. There would be off-hour entrances to health clinics, so the people who are suffering from an endemic societal stigma of being imperfect and broken like you and me could somehow find a way to their health, but so many people died because stigma was the barrier that held the door closed. And I tell you this story because it's tragic to think that thoughts and conditions about ourselves and each other will actually allow us to harm ourselves and each other. Not weapons, not conditions external to us, but in our hearts and minds we allow those to create those kind of barriers to our well-being. I started seeing a therapist a couple years ago, Rosh Hashanah a couple years ago. Find a link. And I remember one day the therapist said to me, he came in and he said to me, I'm a little uncomfortable. He said, I have a little problem. He said, there's some people out in the lobby who know you. And I don't have another exit for you to go out. I don't know what you want me to do. Do you want me to create a little distraction, pull a fire alarm? And I said, no. I want to go out there and let them see that whatever they know me to be, I'm somebody who sees value in self-care. I want them to know that their rabbi, if I am their rabbi, is somebody who will seek good counsel, who will hold up a mirror to himself and meet somebody and say, how am I doing in this game? I want them to know that self-care and growth and personal realization and struggle and challenge that those sessions offer a human being should never be stigmatized. That we should never have a separate exit for someone to go out unseen. In fact, the person should have the courage, and I should say the values to say being there isn't a matter simply of being there. It's a matter of expressing our values to ourselves and to our loved ones. One of my goals for the new synagogue, the new center for Jewish living, is to highlight mental health. Because one of the things I see, conditions that I see in my office more and more and more as the years go by, is mental health challenges. Let's take that out of the darkness. Let's let this synagogue be a synagogue that sees wellness and well-being as tied in with religiosity and ritual. That I don't wear this to somehow say that I'm a better man than someone else. That I don't put a kippah on or raise a kiddush cup to say that I have a greater relationship with God. But instead, that what we say is, let's find what it is to be simply and beautifully and imperfectly human together. On Yom Kippur, we're going to express our imperfection. We're going to say, Bishiva shel ma'ala u'bishiva shel mata. In the heavenly court and in the court on earth, we, every one of us, stands and prays and confesses our brokenness with one another. We offer each other a fist to pound on our chests to say, wake up to whom you are, a perfectly imperfect human being created in God's image. So what might that tell us about God? We look in the prayer book, we look in the Torah, and what you see in these scrolls is a spirituality and a Torah of imperfection. Sarah's jealousy, Jacob's relationship with his brother, Moses' anger, King David's infidelity. What do they say to us about the human notion of what it is to be human and even heroic? It says that Sarah out there raising children, trying to create a beautiful family, comes as a descendant of a Sarah that was a human being, trying to raise a beautiful family. And that Moses, that little boy who was born a couple of years ago in this congregation, is a descendant of a real human being who struggled and challenged most of all by himself. And that Rachel, who will soon go into high school, is a descendant of a woman who was challenged in every day of life because being human is being challenged by life. We have the option of growing or not. We have the option of looking only outwardly at our successes in the world, our achievements, and saying, therein is my growth, my paycheck, my promotion, my worldly towers that I build. Or we can realize that the most important construction and architecture of our lives is what occurs within us. I want to differentiate between self-esteem, for the sake of this sermon, and self-respect. And let's say that self-esteem is what we gain with the straight A's and the three-point jump shots, whatever they are, I'm Jewish, and the pirouettes and all those things that people do, and even the victories that we have over other people. Let's call that self-esteem. But let's focus for a minute on something subtly different, which is self-respect. Self-respect, I believe, is what we get when we overcome not other people but ourselves. when we come to learn who we are through the challenges, not through achievements, but through falling. Self-esteem and self-respect are part and parcel of the movement of our lives, of the drive in our religion. Because God, according to our tradition, wants us to grow. Because God, according to our tradition, deems it that we'll fall, so therefore it must be part of growth. A few years ago, I gave a sermon, I remember, because people have talked to me about it, which was about heroes. I said to you then that as much as I hold our soldiers, our firefighters, our law enforcement officers as heroes, personally, the heroes that inspire and move me the most are the ones here. Have you gone to a 12-step gratitude meeting on Yom Kippur? Have you seen what heroism looks like in a person that you didn't know was a hero? Have you realized how many heroes there are because they're battling challenges in themselves, not once a year, but every single day? Because their victories are their lives. Because you and they who have these challenges of addiction, these challenges of words that we dared not even mention decades ago, those imperfect people teach us by their lives what it is to fail, and then to succeed, and then to succeed, and then to succeed, and maybe to fail again, and then to succeed again. One of the most moving moments of my 20 years, this is my 20th anniversary here. If the lighting is good, you can't tell. One of my most inspiring, moving evening was at a Shabbat dinner at one of your homes. It was a couple in 12-step. And I remember it was his 30th anniversary of sobriety. 30 years. I remember when he raised the Kiddush cup at Shabbat dinner that night, he said something I'll never forget. He said, looking at his wife, he said, "Our children have never seen me as they might have seen me in my 20s, drunk." That's heroism. That's imperfection. That's a beautiful life. That's somebody realizing their potential. You came into a sanctuary, and you have options, like all of our lives. There's a menu. And one of the options is press A, and all you'll get is a beautiful concert because they sing well. Or get B, and you'll get beautiful poetry and a concert because the book's well written and they sing well. Or you can press option C, just down to the left, the yellow button, which means that you have to step into the engagement. Which means that you have to walk into the library of your mistakes together. Find one another there. But sit down for a moment and open the book that you might dare not to read. Open the Torah and realize their mistakes and smile on yours because you'll realize theirs were recorded, which means theirs mattered as much as mine. They weren't marked out, erased from the book of human heroism called our Torah. Examples of human life, because God, the author of Torah, said, I want you to read their story and find yours in it. I want you to find proximity between Jacob and Jacob, Ron and Rachel. I want you to see stories and realize that what you're meant to be doing in your life is writing a Torah, not with a scribe's hand, but with your life, continuing their story, and realizing that you have this gift, this library of errors with beautiful music and beautiful poetry, to walk in and sometimes to have your eyes open and sometimes to close them, because sometimes we need to shift our perspective to find who we are, to look in the prayer book and sometimes to find words black on white in two directions, Hebrew and English, but sometimes just to find a reflection of who you are in that library, to see the beauty of mistakes, what they've taught you, to see what came after them, what you might teach your children, not from your great victories out in the world, but from your great and tiny victories in this world. I spend a lot of time with people at the end of life, as you can imagine. And I often sit with families prior to a funeral, and I'll say, tell me about Dad, as I did a few days ago. Tell me about your sister. Tell me about your mom. People talk about the micro in those moments. People talk about what moved them about a person. Nobody talks about their net worth. what they produced out in the world. They talked about what they produced in here. They talked about the legacy that they passed their kids. They talked about what they gave their grandchildren. I often ask that question. What do you think Mom's legacy was to you? And people are often silenced for a moment. And then they'll talk about her qualities that never showed up except every day they showed up. You had to decipher them from her actions, from her conversations. You had to read into her life to realize ultimately what you take from her life. So do we give the next generation, or those who know us and encounter us in the synagogue and in the street, a legacy of some kind of perfection that says we too are American and strong, always mighty and always striving for success? Or do we admit to them and to us that while we strive for those successes, which we must do, that we find ourselves falling sometimes and climbing sometimes and falling again and climbing again? That if we look at the arc of a successful great life, it looks like this until you zoom in and realize it looks more like an angiogram, up and down and up and down. That all of our lives are made of these mountain peaks and these valleys, and nobody gets to jump only from one peak to the next. I want to suggest that over these 10 days, Yamim Noraim, which means days that fill your chest and your heart and your mind with awe and wonder, that some of that awe and wonder comes from finding who you are. And some of it comes from having the courage to admit who you are to yourself and to others, and to realize that they too are like you, challenged by themselves, struggling to make life meaningful and to do it well. That every single human being who walks into this museum at times of our errors has the gift, and for some of us the door will be bolted shut because we dare not go in, afraid somehow because of a legacy that we've taught ourselves that we don't want to find who we are. We want to be whole and strong and perfect. And others will open the door and shutter it again for another 12 months, saying, I've done it once, I need to stay out of that museum, that library. And others of you will make the most meaning of this. You'll walk in and you'll look for a chair, and you'll sit down and you'll open books, that book and your book, and the people around you, and you'll look and say, what can I do in these days to read, to have clarity of vision, to see how I'm living my life, the pains that I've caused, the forgiveness that I owe, and the apologies that are incumbent upon me. And for you who will take that opportunity, this will be a groundbreaking year. That will be the opening chapter of the next part of the book that you write, an imperfect, beautiful story that you'll call a meaningful life. May God inscribe you in a book in that museum that we call the Book of Life. Shana Tova.